The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnov is available on Stitcher Radio, Podbean, iTunes, and all major platforms. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. 5-star review me. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye. You are now standing at the intersection of history and mystery, science and the strange, and crime and the sublime. I'm DJ BJ Turnov, humble host of this auditorium of audacity. For the loyal, you know what we do by now. For the newcomer, let me fill you in real quick. On Hidden History episodes, we got a subject. It's open-ended, most likely pretty controversial. We're going to look at the questions. Could it be real? Could it be fake? Or something really altogether in between? We're going to try and get as close to the source as possible, gather the evidence, present it to you, and let you be the judge. And this is one of those episodes. We are talking about the controversial America's Stonehenge, also known as Mystery Hill. It is an archaeological site that comes with way more questions than answers. Now, here's the crux of the issue. Did Native Americans use this site? Were pre-Columbian European visitors responsible for building it? Or is this just some twisted historical hoax altogether? You may have already seen a little bit about it on the inaugural season of Scott Wolter's America Unearthed, but now you get to hear it from the horse's mouth. Dennis Stone, owner of America's Stonehenge, joins us momentarily. I hope you do too. Why don't you feed your head a little bit and go on over to grab the latest mystery Mind's Eye news. Archaeologists have recently discovered a secret crypt beneath a Polish chapel, and that's interesting because the chapel is a confirmed final resting place for several Knights Templar, an order that has been subject to a lot of conspiracy theories. One particular legend is that during the Crusades, the Knights Templar recovered the Holy Grail, which I believe is the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper, and then hid it beneath a chapel in western Poland. Read about the details now. The article is up on our Facebook and Twitter pages at Mind's Eye Show, or go to our website, themindseyemedia.com. From one archaeological mystery to another, we are about to talk about America's Stonehenge, real ancient history or real hoax in a Mind's Eye moment. Dennis Stone, owner of America's Stonehenge, is our guest now. Dennis, really appreciate some of your time tonight.
Oh, Brian, thank you so much for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, let's rock and roll, shall we?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, let's just go right into the basics of America's Stonehenge. Where is it? What can visitors expect to glimpse when they come?
Yeah, we're located in a town of North Salem, New Hampshire, about 40 miles north of Boston, Massachusetts, and 20 miles from the seacoast. And the biggest city near us is Manchester, New Hampshire, has an airport too. When visitors come to see us, it's an open-air museum. It's about 110 acres. They'll cover about 15 acres of that doing the walk, and it takes maybe about an hour to an hour and a half to do the tour. We have a visitor center, so they can pull into the parking lot. When they go inside, there's artifacts on display. There's dioramas. We usually have a theater with a 12-minute video, but that's online right now because of COVID-19. The theater itself is closed. And we have a small book corner and gifts and stuff like that, restrooms, of course. And then they can do the tour. And again, the tour takes about an hour to an hour and a half. And we have actually a free app download on your mobile app on your smartphone. And you can actually take this on the tour. You can do it at home too. And it talks to you. It has pictures and text. So you can do a complete virtual tour at home, or you can use it during the tour of the site. And so people can get an idea what the place is like before they even, show up at our site.
And can they download that app, right now, or is that something that's with a purchase type thing?
Oh, it's free. We did it about 2 years ago, and it's complimentary. We paid a bit of money for it, and it's been a really good, a very nice value added, I think, for our visitors. And I'd say most of the people use it now. Just a small percentage don't like using the cell phone, or they're not tech savvy. But you can just go to StonehengeUSA.com. and you'll see it there, and also the 12-minute videos there, like little bullet points they can press. And so they can do it right now, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that. If forever those who can't, let's say, download an app or don't have that accessible right now, I would just say go right to Google.com. Just type in America's Stonehenge. You'll find the website right up. But also just follow along with some of the pictures tonight, because we're going to be talking about a variety of some of the features there. So to have that pictorial connection, I highly recommend that for the show as well. But definitely, if you can do it, definitely go to the website to download that app. That sounds like a lot of fun there. And I know when I go to museums, I love that whole sensory experience. So that's a good idea. Now the actual name America's Stonehenge, when those who do kind of take a look at the images, you'll notice that it doesn't really look like the famous megalithic site, but really the name is just really more to conjure up a mental connection than an actual image, right, Dennis?
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, it doesn't it functions very similar to Stonehenge in England or many of the other ancient sites around the world. But it's actually the form is different than Stonehenge. Stonehenge is so unique, and it's one of 50,000 megalithic sites in Western Europe. But megalithic sites are on basically 6 continents out of the 7 continents. And but functionally, it's the same. We have 51 alignments with the sun, the moon, and stars. And we also have these walls we call serpentine walls. They're shaped like a serpent, and they have a head, a body, and a tail. And we found these only in the last 4 years. They're anywhere from 30 feet, and the longest one we found, we believe, is about 2,550 feet. And it might be the constellation Draco, kind of like the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, in Peoples, Ohio, is a very large earthen-shaped serpent with an egg in its mouth, it looks like, although some repairs were done to the head of it, so I'm not sure exactly how it looked originally, but that is an amazing structure out there in Ohio. And again, it might have been inspired by the constellation Draco, is one of the thoughts. But there are about 94 other similar earthen works like that. Our serpent walls actually, again, we found them since 2016. We had no idea that some of these might be that because they're covered with brush, trees, and debris. And then now we're using LiDAR, and you can see them as clear as a bell, with this LiDAR. It's handheld LiDAR we've been using up on our site all spring. It's pretty amazing. But they're found in Connecticut. There's over 400 of them. They're in Rhode Island, and basically every New England state I've heard, except for the state of Maine. But they go right in Pennsylvania, and we're finding the same kind of serpentine walls in Indiana, eastern Colorado, Alabama, and the latest is out in Mount Shasta. I got about 100 pictures on our computer at our museum that somebody sent me. And it shows not only some walls that look very similar to ours, but serpentine walls that look very similar to ours also. So the wall, if you can envision, it's kind of like we'll have a head, and it can be a gigantic boulder that kind of looks like a head, and then an undulating body in some cases behind it, either horizontally or vertically, and then it ends with a pointed tail. In farmers' walls in New England, they run about 240,000 miles. They started building those in the 1700s. And they did it to clear fields of rocks, establish boundaries, and also stock fences. And they're pretty straight or linear, and it makes sense. But these walls, they twist, they turn, they bend, and they don't really do any of the things that farmers' walls, do. And they usually contain very large slabs of stone that were quarried, too, either stood on their end or sometimes like a monolith vertically. So these serpent walls are something from the East Coast to the West Coast, but our site has about 13 of them. And we are finding some measurement systems in some of the New England sites, including ours, that appear to be what we call the megalithic yard, which is 32.64 inches and different increments of that.
And where's that found on your site?
Yeah, it's actually found in some of the stone chambers. It's found on the groove of the one of the features called the Sacrificial Table. The size of the groove, from one side to the other, the length of it, to the top of it, the width of it. The width of the table actually itself, and the height above bedrock to the top surface. And then some of the chambers and some of the large standing monoliths. If you measure them, they all seem to come out, but they are kind of crude stones. They're not nice and square like some of the Egyptian type stones or some of the ones you see in South America. So they're kind of crude and rough. But if you do the overall lengths or just measure a wall, some of the walls have 90-degree bends in them. And you go from that to the next, and they come out uneven inches. They'll come out like, 93.75 inches or something, which is not normally what you build with as a carpenter, or a builder. But if you use a megalithic unit, it fits nicely into it.
Before you mentioned the sacrificial table, tell me a little bit more about that. What does that look like, and was it actually used for sacrifice?
Yeah, it looks like it's about 9 feet roughly by about 6 feet. It looks like kind of like a bell shape to it. And it has a groove that goes around the top surface. Maybe the groove's about 3 inches wide, maybe 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep. And the groove we thought for many years was a rectangle, roughly 4 by 6 feet, but we measured it very carefully. And again, we found out it was a megalithic unit. It worked out very nicely. But it also is a trapezoid in shape. It's about roughly 9 inches narrower at the top of this rectangular, the trapezoid groove than the bottom of it. And the table, we don't know what it was used for, but some people have claimed it's a cider press, but you can't get a horse and a wagon down there. The area has a gigantic wall, which is like a big platform where people could actually watch something from, if it was a ceremonial place. The oracle chamber is on the east side of it. The platform's on the west side of it. There's a giant standing stone just on the south side of the table. It's one of these big monoliths. It's about 7 feet tall, and an equal one on the north side of it. And I have a small ATV, a three-wheeler, that I can't get in there to get leaves out. So I have to carry the leaves when they blow in there about, 30 or 40 feet to put them into the wagon. So how would you get a horse and a wagon in there with a load of apples, There's no historical data to support that. But the table might be, ceremonial or sacrificial, perhaps. And it is connected to the oracle chamber. Its east end of the table is actually attached to the oracle chamber. And there's a tube that runs through underneath the table to the oracle chamber. It's about a 6 foot, kind of a square tube, about 1 foot by 1 foot roughly. And on the inside of the oracle chamber, below where the tube comes in, it's about head height. There's actually a step. So if you're about 5.5 feet tall, roughly, you can stand on the step, and your head will be at the right position to yell through this tube. We can't figure out any other function on a farm or a family that was living there were actually fifth-generation shoemakers back in the 1700s going into the 1800s, a Paddy family. And but I have seen things in Mexico. I have seen things over in Greece. We've been to Delphi and all around Greece and Malta and many European sites, megalithic sites particularly. And the site does look ceremonial for one thing, but the table does look like some of the altars you see at different places, that were used for perhaps sacrifice or at least ceremonies, And even modern-day churches have altars in them, going back to a time when they were actually sacrificial altars, kind of symbolic, So the table's it's made out of granite. It was moved about 40 feet from its quarry site. There's no metal tool markings in the quarry site itself or on the table. Its quarry site actually became the astronomical center of the 51 alignments. So maybe that was a special spot they chose, and then they built these 2 cairns, piles of rocks basically, and that's what formed the astronomical center of all those alignments.
What happens on, let's say, for example, the solar events, the equinoxes and the solstices?
Yeah, so the sun will actually rise over a particular stone. That particular stone has fallen. It's about a 10-foot monolith that has fallen over. I will say about these monoliths look sort of like an arrowhead shape, and they were part of the bedrock. Somebody quarried them, they shaped them or dressed them using percussion flaking, and then they stood them upright. And then the sun will rise over the monolith or set over the monolith. But we also have not only the equinox, but we have the mid-year, and that's a little different. And the reason is the Earth doesn't go around the sun in a circle. It's actually an ellipse. And so what they did is they divided the year into 91 and a fraction days. And I was reading in a book from 1978 called Echoes of the Ancient Skies by Edward Krupp from the Griffith Observatory in L.A. And he's an archaeoastronomer. And anyway, he wrote about how if you're going to divide the year equally, you have to put your monolith or whatever you're looking at 1 degree to the north on the sunrise or sunset, or 2 days, 2 sun diameters, 1 day or 2 sun diameters, 1 degree. And that will divide the year into, like 91 and a half, 91 or whatever it is. But if you use the equinox, it's going to be like 93 days to the summer solstice, 93 days back, and then to winter solstice, like 89 days. So whoever these people were, they actually did the mid-year, which was on Sunday, and they also did the equinox, which was yesterday. On top of the sun's 4 quarters, we have the cross-quarter days, and these are approximately November 1st, August 1st, February 1st, and May 1st. They're not only European, even Celtic holidays, but if you go to Mesa Verde in Colorado, they actually did it there too, and that's Native American. And also Cahokia Mountain State Park, if I recall, I was there in 1991. And Cahokia has some of the biggest pyramids in the world, right across from St. Louis in Collinsville, Illinois. And they call it America's Woodhenge because it had a wooden circle set up like Woodhenge in England, which is not far from Stonehenge. And they were actually aligned like our site, except it was wooden poles originally. The quarter days, the cross quarter days, and I'm not sure about the lunar alignments there because it's been about almost 30 years since I last visited that site. But our site, is quite complex,
So with this, calendar, it's alluded to, possible, connections to either the Native Americans or the, pre-Columbian Western European culture. And, you presented some loose connections there as well. I want to get into maybe some possible concrete evidence that you found for one or the other. Has any actual Native American artifacts been found on your site?
Yeah, we have found a wigwam site, which is down by the parking lot area. It was found by our archaeologists back somewhere around 1993, I think it was. It was about a 30-foot wide wigwam. The post moles were still there, all the little colorations where the post once stood. And when they got into the middle of it, they found 2 fire pits, and they also found the grease from cooking still. So those 2 samples from the 2 different fire pits were sent, and I believe those went to the geochrome laboratories, and the date was 1,700 years old and 2,000 years old. So not quite as old as the oldest carbon dating on our site. But on the other side of the hill, we have a glacial cliff shelter. So about a half a mile to the west of where the wigwam was, on the west side of our site, they found pottery and a few other artifacts, and they found them in 1958. 1960, thermoluminescence came about, so it was 2 years too early for that. But stylistically, they dated the pottery to Middle Woodland period pottery, around 2,000 to 2,500 years old. Because we found stone tools on the site, hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone picks, scrapers, fire starting stones, stone cups, arrowhead, stone knives, and other implements that came out of the site, for sure. So, yes, Native Americans have been found in our area.
And before you mentioned possible pre-Columbian Western European connections, I think mentioned is that there were some various inscriptions found throughout the site. Tell me about those. What was found? What language were they in? What do they say? Who translated them?
Sure. Yeah, some stones were found in the site back in 1960s and 67 in a chamber called the Chamber in Ruins. And that chamber is one of the more interesting structures because we've got 3 carbon datings out of the north wall, and including a 4,000 and a 3,000-year-old charcoal samples, along with some of the stone tools I mentioned on the north side of the north wall of that chamber. And more recently, we found that the 3 corners of that chamber are corbelled. And corbelling is kind of like a false arch, where the stones are slightly stacked like an inverted staircase. So 3 corners of that were corbelled, and the oracle chamber we knew had a corbelling. And that's an old world style you can find in Ireland and some of the ancient sites that I've seen, and also in England and other, where other megalithic sites are built. But so that chamber, it has 2 windows. It is trapezoid on its floor plan. That's another thing we discovered recently. It's not a square rectangular floor plan. It's actually trapezoidal shape from what we can gather. And about a 7,000-pound roof slab is collapsed into the chamber. And when that went down, it brought down a 1,000-pound lintel. And right where that lintel was is where they found in 1967 2 of the stones that were put on display in the museum as unknown markings on stones. So these had some sort of inscriptions on them, and they were just placed in the building back in 67. And in 69, a third one was found in that same vicinity near the doorway, not too far from the lintel stone. So in 1975, Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University came up to the site for his first visit. I believe it was in July, and I was there that day. And he went and on a tour of the site. And after he toured the site and everything, he was pretty blown away by the site. He got to look at some of the inscriptions that were in the visitor center that had, like I mentioned, been on display for several years. And he was pretty taken back by them. So he took a couple of these back to Islington, Mass, to his home, and he studied them, and he made plaster cast of them. His interpretation was one of them was Iberian Punic, or Iberian Phoenician, if you will, and the other one was Libyan, and the third one was Celtic, or Celt-Iberic. And so you see the word Iberic in there. He felt that these inscriptions originated in Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. But these weren't the only inscriptions found at our site. There are others found there too, even after his visit. And a couple others were found while he was there, actually. because we didn't have our eyes trained on these things necessarily. You know, it's like once you see them, like, oh, okay, now I know what I'm looking for. But also in Vermont, it has the highest number of inscriptions among some of the chambers up in Woodstock, Royalton, Putney, Poultney, Vermont. But these inscriptions are found all the way out to British Columbia, California, all the way down to Brazil. And especially the Phoenician. The Phoenician's been found on Manana Island up near Monhegan Island up in Maine, which we just did a mini vacation up there in August, I guess it was. But all the way down to Brazil, Phoenician script. Because we know the Phoenicians are great sailors. They set up 50 trading colonies around the Mediterranean and 7 on the west coast of Africa. And they even sailed around Africa. They were hired by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho to go around 600 BC to actually go right around the whole continent of Africa, which people back then think you could do, you know. But it's thought that these people made it across the Atlantic and came into the Americas. And the Phoenicians would have been the ones that would have been the real maritimers that could do something like that. They would sail at night. A lot of ancient people wouldn't sail at night, and they had ships that would hold hundreds of tons of cargo. So it's a very controversial, theory, because we've been trained that nobody came to America until Columbus. In 1960, they proved the Vikings had come over here, but before that, in 1959, you'd probably be arguing with somebody over whether the Vikings actually made it or not. And just I think 2 years ago, they found the second Viking settlement up in Newfoundland at Point Rosy. Yeah. So the thought now is the Vikings were coming into the Americas for perhaps 400 years from Greenland. Originally, we thought maybe they came over, did a winter, and they went home. And then later in time, I heard they came over for 25 years. But we've always, I think, been prejudiced against ancient people using the oceans as highways.
Barry Fell, you mentioned before, was the one who translated, and just kind of looking him up. He's a well-regarded zoologist, but and like I said, I'm just kind of play devil's advocate here a little bit, because this is a critique of it, is that, his translations are kind of pretty much refuted from almost all of academia. So, I mean, kind of how do you respond to that portion of it?
But David Kelly, the great, he was from Harvard, and he ended up out in British Columbia. He's one of the most famous linguists, epigraphers, particularly the Mayan script. And he criticized Dr. Barry Fell, but he goes, you know what? Although he fell in many areas, jumped to conclusions, he misinterpreted some of the inscriptions. He said basically Fell was correct. And that's not really. I read that. That's not really what he said. He said that we have to, take a look at what he's saying in a serious manner, just not, disregard it. He didn't agree that the translations actually said that, though. But like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate, because a lot of people have these critiques, and I just want you to be able to respond to these critiques. I'm not one to judge either way. Yeah. Before your dad, William Goodwin was the one who owned the property, and he brought it to prominence also in the 1930s, although then it was called Mystery Hill. On that introductory video that you've mentioned a few times, in it says that Goodwin did some restoration. What type of restoration did he do? Yeah, actually, it was my dad named it Mystery Hill Caves in 1958. So my dad actually got it from he got it from Malcolm Pearson, and Malcolm Pearson just died about 10 years ago at 99 years old. But Malcolm's the one that introduced Goodwin to the site in 1936, and Goodwin was from Hartford, Connecticut. But so Goodwin was an antiquarian. He was involved with insurance. His first cousin was J.P. Morgan, and anyway, he was very interested in Native American mounds out west. He actually lived in Ohio, in Columbus, and he was mapping some of the 10,000 mounds out there for the highway department. He didn't do all 10,000, but he did quite a few of them. That was about 120 years ago. So when he heard about our site, he visited it, and he basically was just totally blown away by the structures. He had never seen anything quite like that. And initially he thought maybe it was Viking. It was so covered with debris, you couldn't really make out the stonework that well. But they photographed it immediately, because Malcolm was a professional photographer. So he actually photographed the site in 36 before Goodwin bought it. He bought the property in 37, and that's when he began cleaning the brush, the debris, and started cleaning out the dirt, excavating it, and doing some restoration. He didn't build the site as some skeptics think, Goodwin must have built it. We have 4 photographs of one of the Oracle Chamber, one of the Sacrificial Table, one of what we call the Paddy area, and one of that east-west changer from 1920. That's 16 years before Goodwin ever visited the site. And we put them up on display in our museum, so you can see what the site looked like before he touched it,
And all the same stones that are still there before he touched it.
Yeah, the big stuff. Yeah, unfortunately, you know, in the 1800s, some of the site was taken away. I mean, that happens. I was at Knowth in Ireland, Douth and Newgrange, and Knowth, I believe, is the one. No, it's Douth, actually, I guess. It has part of it missing. I said, why is it partly missing? There's a crater in the side of this gigantic 300-foot, you know, tomb. Well, they were using it for road building during the potato famine, is the story I heard, whether it's accurate or not. But they did that at a lot of sites, you know, destroying them. And our site was one of them that also was damaged, you know. And so some of the big stones were taken away by quarrymen. And you can see, I think there's 16 modern drill marks where they split the stones using plug and feather. And we even have a plug and feather left behind the kit by one of the quarry people. It's on display in our museum. So we know what the site looked like. Goodwin actually, what he basically did is if a stone was within 3 feet of a wall, he assumed it fell off the wall, and he'd have his people put it back up on the wall, you know. It's not as rebuilt as Newgrange in Ireland, and I've been to that site. That, if you look at pictures of that, it's hardly recognizable. Or I just came back from Chaco Canyon last year at Mesa Verde. We were out there doing a tour of a lot of those sites. We had been out there before, but we did another tour. And you don't even recognize some of the, after they rebuild it, what it looked like before, the before and after pictures. So our site has some of that, but I would say some of the sites are even been rebuilt more than our site. So that's another critic, you know, by skeptics. Oh, your sites, yeah, it has been. If it's thousands of years old and is also damaged by earthquakes and also by the Paddy family and by quarrymen, of course it's going to be altered. It's not pristine, you know. But they blame that on the site and say, see, there's nothing there, you know. It's like, you know, the skeptics, you know, they just, you know, I don't pay much attention to them. We're trying to find out who built the site, you know, what the site is, you know. We're trying to find the truth about the site, basically, to our best of our abilities.
You're investing your own money into finding what the actual real origin is. So, you know, I commend you for that, for sure. And, you know, you face the critiques head on. So what about you mentioned, I guess, the 1800s and the colonial era as well?
Well, the family Paddies are, again, 5 generations of, you know, shoemakers, starting with Peter, who came over from England, you know, and then there was a Richard and a Seth, and then a Jonathan, you know, and the older Seth actually bought part of the hill back in 1734, and it was still part of the Haverhill Peak of Massachusetts. And then in 1741, New Hampshire and Mass settled the boundary dispute and became New Hampshire. We were now part of the Salem district. And in 1744, he bought another piece of the property, which probably included the site. And again, the main site's about 1 acre, you know, surrounded by 15 acres with the astronomical alignments, and then another 90 acres with other features. Big quarried slabs all over the hilltop. These are, you know, these are separated from the bedrock, and they're just laying all over the hilltop. Some of them are, you know, many multi-ton stones. They look like they probably were going to be used like roof slabs, like, you know, the couple that remain on the chamber in ruins and another structure right next to it, you know. So, you know, we even have in 1667, the name of 2 Native Americans that sold the land for like £3 and some shillings, I guess. So we even have that transaction in the record, you know. So we were part of Massachusetts, and then in 1741, we're in New Hampshire. And the Paddy family, we think, built the first, or the house up there, actually sometime after 1750, which was when Salem was incorporated. And so the Paddy family were on top of the hill. And Jonathan, the third one that may have been on the hill, a lot of people say he might have built the whole place. You know, they say, oh, Jonathan, he was a bootlegger, mail robber, bank robber, and, you know, hid from the authorities. And he had his 6 husky sons build the whole place, thousands and thousands of feet of stone walls and all the structures, you know. And some of the roof slabs, the biggest one weighs about 14 tons, you know. But he actually had only 2 sons. One son died at 17 years old in Boston, and then he had his other son, Seth, that, you know, grew into adulthood. You know, so he didn't have 6 husky sons. He might have had 5 husky daughters. Maybe put them to work out there building it, you know. But he was a shoemaker. He took taxes for 3 years. He was a town tax collector around 1800. And then he took in the town paupers from 1831 to 1837. And I have the actual handwritten records of him putting a bid in and other people putting bids in each year for to take in the town poor people, you know. And he made one year like $360. So he supplemented his income by taking in poor people. One year he had 11 people living. And these are usually the people that couldn't take care of themselves. You know, they're, you know, older or, you know, sickly or whatever. And then by 1838, no more paupers. They're gone to another farm. And that's when we think he got involved with the Underground Railway, helping the slaves go through, you know. Wilbur Seibert wrote about the Underground in Massachusetts, Ohio, and New York. But in ours, he talks about a Mr. Poor, a Mr. Hussey, and a Mr. Donald with a horse named Nellie, came up from Shawshing Village, about 20 miles south of the site. And they would do it quietly, I guess, and they would come up during the middle of the night, and they'd be back home in time for breakfast, delivering the slave or slaves to Patty. And then he in turn would, move them further north, So it's part of the Underground Railway. I think the Cincinnati Freedom Center has a little bit of information about that in it.
And the site was the site used as part of the Underground Railroad?
I think his house, he had a wooden house up there, sitting over what we think was an old courtyard, And there's a wall there that was used as a lolly column. Today you have the steel cement lolly columns in your basement. They built a stone wall 2/3 of the way across the cellar to support the house. At some point, they blocked the entire half of the cellar off, and they faced the wall very nicely because it was against the law to help the slaves, And so if you had a Fed coming up there and heard rumors about Patty's helping the slaves, if you went into the basement, you'd see a beautiful faced wall. But actually, part of that, maybe a quarter of it to a third of it, was actually an opening at one time. And it's like on the back side, you can see where the wall is unfinished. It goes to an end, and then they actually just filled it in. It wasn't faced nicely at all on one side of the wall. On the other side, it was completely faced beautifully, like disguising it. So, it's circumstantial at best, but it's possibly they hid the slaves behind that wall there, or had a place where they can put them quickly, But the house partly caught on fire around 1855, and we believe the house is across the street, across from our visitor center, basically, just down the road just a little bit. And the Patty family, in 1907, the history of Salem, they actually talk about our site. But the Patty's family standing right in front of that house. So we think the house was damaged, and then they just moved the house down. There's a road that goes right to where the house is off our hill, so they could have moved it right down there by removing the chimney, windows, and all the furniture. They did that kind of thing back then, They moved homes, meeting houses, churches, and that kind of stuff,
Yeah, that book you reference, the 1907 History of Salem, where they talk about Jonathan Patty. I guess they describe it as Jonathan Patty's Caves is what the site was known, really, or the property. Yeah. Quote, It says, "This is a wild but beautiful spot among rough boulders and soft pines, about which the most weird and fantastic tale might be woven." What do you think that's referencing?
Yeah, it's probably I'm sure it's the stonework, the chambers, the structures. Yeah. I don't know the conclusion you can come to because, if you wrote about another farm down the street, I don't know if you'd come up with those same words, And that guy, Edward Gilbert, actually was a friend of Robert Frost. They worked together in the mills down in Lawrence. So a little poetry going on there. My grandfather had Robert Frost for a teacher at Pinkerton Academy. But anyway, that guy was probably talking about the strange structures there,
Yeah.
And so,
I guess if you had to lean toward way, it's definitely Native American, but do you really think that? Do you really think that's the pre-Columbian? If you had a gun to your head, what would it be?
Yeah, I think there's a pre-Columbian. There's something going on with the pre-Columbian because if you look at the size, the shape, the orientation, maybe the standard unit to measure the inscriptions, you have to I know David Stewart Smith, Dr. David Stewart Smith died 4 years ago. He was with us for 40 years. He had spent several years in England for the English Heritage, working over there, and got a couple of doctorates after. He was really big about the way the stones were shaped, and he had Dr. Gary Hume, our state archaeologist, who was retired but still alive, actually come down and monitor the whole excavation of one of the big slabs, and he goes, it's unmistakable. This was made like a 1.5 ton arrowhead, the same manner, not Metal Age. But David really felt Native American. He said there was a couple reasons why. One of them had to do with ceramics, In New Hampshire, I think the ceramics go back almost 3,000 years, but if the site goes back 4,000 years, ceramics go back earlier in England, and in Great Britain, basically. It goes back, I think, I'm going to say almost 7,000 years on ceramics. So he had a problem with the ceramics, I think. So he was in the New Hampshire Humanities Council, the New England Native American, whatever it was. He was in a lot of different groups, New Hampshire Archaeological Society. He was friends with all the archaeologists, all over the north, David Starbuck, all these different people. But he felt Native American, and I talked to him. He didn't really want to hear too much about European, and archaeologists, Pat Hume, who's been, in archaeology for most of her life, and she was the president of New Hampshire Archaeological, she kind of leans Native American too. I think that John Wesley Powell actually set the tone of people can't discuss it, and if you read, I got the actual thing on my phone, what he said, in quotations, and also what Cyrus Thomas said too, In fact, Cyrus Thomas said, and I'm going to misquote him slightly, but he said basically, I will not or cannot talk about all the pre-Columbian artifacts that were found in the mounds, some of the native, some of the million mounds that were out west, it's not exactly what he said, but it's pretty close.
Paraphrasing,
so,
yeah.
And that's in quotations too, what he said. I could actually pull it off my phone, but so I think the tone was set in the 1880s, 1890s by those guys, that there will be and Samuel L. Morrison again, no explorers before Columbus. Yeah. So there is a prejudice,
Yeah, it's a dirty little word of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, there's critics out there and everything. Some people say you're just trying to make a buck up there. Yeah, of course. But if we sold the land in New Hampshire, 110 acres,
you'd be
I would
all
never
right.
have to. I could go to the Cayman Islands and never have to.
I didn't get a chance to see the episode, but I know Scott Walter came out there for America Unearthed. What did he think?
I mean, he thinks it's an ancient site, of course, but
did he think Native American, pre-Columbian, Western European? What?
Yeah, pre-Columbian. Yeah, he was
did?
looking at the. He knows Native Americans were on the hilltop, but he was looking at the inscriptions and using his the scanning electron microscope, I guess, and 3D microscope, whatever it was, the equipment to look at the inscriptions very carefully to see weathering on them. And one of the stones was sent back to his laboratory out in Minneapolis. It's called the Ball Stone that Barry Feld looked at, the one that you'll probably read about.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at the weathering and everything. He looks at biotypes and micros and stuff like that break down over time. And he said, well, there's a lot of weathering in the grooves, where this was made, So he thought it was, not a fake, something made like maybe in the, I don't know when, in the last 100 years or something, But so that's what. But yeah, and then he looked because he did the line that went to Stonehenge, which is kind of interesting. Nevertheless, if it's a big, all I can say is there are lines that go out from our site, and you can take them for what you want. True south is Machu Picchu, and on the equinox sunrise, it's the Canary Island pyramids. On the sunset, it's Pueblo Bonito at Chaco Canyon, and the winter solstice sunset is the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan near Mexico City, which my dad and I visited back in the 80s. So there could be a lot of just coincidences, but it's interesting nevertheless. You tell people oh, that's pretty cool. Some people don't believe in coincidences. Some people do. I would say archaeologists always believe in coincidences. That's just a coincidence. We hear that a lot. If they can't explain it. So the mainstream, I should say.
Yeah. And what's the future look like for the technology there?
Gentleman from Connecticut calls me up, and he's the only one on the East Coast with this brand new handheld LiDAR that's made in Florida. And he approached us and said, I'd like to come up and do some scans of your site. And I was like, wow, And he had a friend from Waltham, Mass, right near Boston, who has a ground penetration radar. So they've been up all spring. In fact, they were just about a week and a half ago doing more work. And we have 15 acres of the 110 acres already LiDAR scanned. And we have a couple of areas done with a GPR. So the cool thing is they're going to blend the technologies together and have above and below the ground imaging, 3D. And so they're actually working on that at this moment. To do the other 90 acres, I don't know when we'll ever have that done because it took them 600 hours just to process the data for the 15 acres. And so, that may be down the road someday, And then the ground penetration radar we used. So we're using that. And the latest thing we did almost 2 weeks ago was optically stimulated luminescence. It's called OSL, and it basically dates dirt. So if you have a structure and there's dirt that's been put next to it, and it's been there for eons, you can actually take cores, send it to a laboratory, and it's a long process. They actually can tell you how old the dirt is and when the last time it saw the light of day. So almost 2 weeks ago, we did 4 cores, and the doctor came out from the University of Washington. His 2 colleagues came up from Brookhaven National Laboratory out near where you are. And yeah, we had them up there, and both of them, I think, were from France originally, but they were actually setting up a lab at the laboratory to do this processing because OSL in the past, in some instances, have taken 5 years to get the results back. And there's a chamber in Pennsylvania on top of a kind of a terraced hill, I guess. And it's thought to be colonial or post-colonial because there shouldn't be any ancient stonework or earthworks in the Northeast. That's what we've been taught. Well, the date came back from 2018. They just got the results back about a month ago. And the medium date on that structure was 450 BC. So it's not colonial or post-colonial. It's something that goes back before Christ. And that was a separate project using OSL. So,
And that was
we're
taken
hoping
from
that
what part of the America's Stonehenge did you take that from?
Yeah, one of the samples came from the roof of what we call the oracle chamber. The oracle chamber is one of the largest structures still on the site. And again, we'll have to wait a year to find out how old that is. And then they took samples inside the structure. They had to pull a couple of stones and get behind the walls to the dirt, and they took that. And that's 3 samples. And then they checked another chamber called the Watch House, which is about 300 feet from the main, what we call the main site. It's a satellite structure. And they took a sample from there also. And they took a couple of stone samples too, the stones that were kind of between the dirt and the wall itself. And the idea is that, when was the last time it saw the light of day, and so the process actually uses laser beams, and they had to do all sorts of cleaning. It's kind of like dating pottery with a thing called thermoluminescence, which started in 1960. But this new thing is actually kind of new technology. So we used the LiDAR to map the area where they were doing the coring, and because we did 15 acres, we used a radar over the top of the oracle chamber, and then they took the cores, and we also GPSed it. She had a $16,000 GPS pole, and she marked all the things, I guess precisely. So it's the first time that equipment's all been used together.
So in the next, bit of time, actually, you're really going to actually know how old this site is, and we're going to go into some of the, evidence for the origin of it. But you're probably actually going to know pretty soon definitively what is the origin, or at least the age of it.
Yeah, it needs to give you minimum dates, obviously, because the structure's built first, and the material comes after that. So the structure is either a little bit older than the sample, or it could be many, hundreds of years older, depending when the soil came in, But we have 12 carbon datings, and that started in 1966. And both Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and Geochrome Laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts, did the radiocarbon testing for us. And that went on to, 1966 to about 1995, so about 30 years. The nice thing about OSL is you don't need charcoal. You can't find charcoal everywhere, but you can find dirt pretty much everywhere, as long as it's not contaminated, nobody's dug it up and put it back in there,
right,
and messed it up. It has to be basically untouched, and that's the big question, like, were we sampled? Hopefully nothing contaminated it.
I love the fact that, you allow people come in, and even the haters, they can judge for themselves. You present the evidence. Next time I'm in the area, you can definitely expect a visit from me. I got to know, is America's Stonehenge dog friendly? I don't travel anywhere without my boy Goose.
Oh. Well, you have a dog with you. Well, we have alpacas up there too, so we have for almost 20 years. And, you can talk to me about that when you get here. No, we have no dog. Service dogs, but because of the alpacas, some of the dogs started stressing them out, so we had a policy. But if your dog's good, I'll talk to you about that.
He's alpaca friendly, from my understanding. Although I've never seen him interact. Although he might be overly friendly, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay.
That'd be some weird interspecies stuff going on there.
Yeah,
but, anyway, so you give out your website before I let you go one more time.
Sure. Yeah. So it's the website's StonehengeUSA.com, and all those things you mentioned are on that. Our phone number. If you have questions, email us. We'll try to answer them to our best of our ability. And we're open every day but Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we're always there.
That seems fair. You got to have a couple days off, right? Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it with my own 2 eyes whenever I get the chance. I appreciate that. Obviously, I'll let you know when. Dennis Stone, owner of America's Stonehenge, much obliged for coming on the Mind's Eye.
Oh, thank you, Brian. Yeah, I appreciate it, and had a nice talk with you tonight, and look forward to seeing you and your pups.
Mind's Eye wrap up when we come back. Mind's Eye wrap up, y'all. And if any of you have visited America's Stonehenge before, I would love to hear your thoughts, or even show me some of your own pictures. You can shoot me a message. Go on over to the contact page at themindseye.media.com. And I guess kind of final word on America's Stonehenge here. And I personally like the take from Plymouth State University archaeologist David Starbuck, who says that the archaeological site is unquestionably provocative, puzzling, and above all, controversial. And next week's guest exhibits all of those exact same traits. Alan R. Warren, true crime writer and host of the popular NBC radio show House of Mystery, stops on by, and I really highly recommend you taking a listen to House of Mystery, particularly the Sketch Cop episode. And I do that because I just have happened to co-host that episode. Alan has graciously let me co-host a couple episodes recently, so want you rolling over to that and check it out. It's a real good episode, and really all of House of Mystery. But I do digress. Next week we are going to particularly talk about his newest book, one of many. It's called Murder Times 6. The True Story of the Wellsgray Park Murders. And that is a very important case because the killer is up for parole next year. You need to listen to this one. Until then, be well and let well be. I'm DJ BJ Turnov, signing off for The Mind's Eye. The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnov is available on Stitcher Radio, Podbean, iTunes, and all major platforms. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. 5-star review me.